Hi friends, this is Jennifer from DecorSauce and I'm so excited that you're joining me today. Today I'm going to be wallpapering one wall in my photography studio and I'm going to be showing you exactly how I do it. So wallpaper has had kind of a resurgence over the last couple of years. You probably have seen designers using it, grass cloth coverings and things like that in their new current designs. And I always kind of thought, oh, that's so crazy because it's just such a hassle to remove. But we're gonna give it a go because I'm dying for this faux brick wallpaper. And right now Home Depot has a special on this, guys. It's 30 cents a square foot, which is, you just cannot beat the price on this. And it's only gonna take 3 rolls for my wall, which ends up being about $50. So it's so cheap. It's cheaper for me to do a wall in this wallpaper than it is for me to buy a new backdrop or something else. So I'm really excited to show you how we're going to be applying it. And with its resurgence has also been a little change on how you apply it. So back in the 1990s when borders were everything, we had lots of them in my house growing up, and it was, you had to soak it in water and then wring it out a certain way, and it was just it's a mess. This one is not pasted at all. So we're going to be rolling the paste on the wall like you would paint and then placing our wallpaper from there. So I'm going to go ahead and remove all my switch plates and do any patching to the wall that needs done. It doesn't have to be perfect or painted, but I don't want there to be any holes in the wallpaper behind there. I don't want my nail to go through the wallpaper and straight into a hole. So I'm gonna do any necessary patching that I have, and then I'm gonna show you how we draw the line to start hanging our wallpaper. I just want to take a quick second to show you some of the supplies that you're going to be needing to complete your wallpaper project. First of all, you're gonna need your wallpaper, but also you're going to be needing wallpaper paste. This comes in quarts or it comes in gallon. I just decided to get a gallon because I didn't want to fool with running out in the middle of my project. So probably need way less than this for one wall, but for the price of 3 quarts, I could just get a gallon and it's cheaper. So there's that. My wallpaper, you're going to need a paintbrush for your edging to edge your paste up around the ceiling. Of course, a roller to roll on your paste. A paint straight edge or paint shield. This one's 24 inch. It just helps you get a straight line where you cut your wallpaper at the ceiling. A telescoping paint handle extension, some patch for my walls, a level, and of course your tray liner, and a spreader or scraper like this to help just get any bubbles out of your wallpaper once you apply it on the wall. I will post the link below to all these products so you can see exactly what I used and how much they cost. Now that I have all my holes patched in the wall and it's prepped and ready for the wallpaper, the next thing that we have to do, and the most important thing, is that we have a straight line going from the ceiling to the floor for your wallpaper. So you only need to do this once, but it's the line you have to follow for the very first row of your wallpaper to make sure that it's straight. Now, for me, I'm only doing one wall, so it's a little bit simpler. If you're doing more than one wall, the technique is you have to actually allow for a little bit of overlap on your left side to kind of wrap that wall on the left side. But for me, I can do exactly the length of my wallpaper because I'm only gonna do this one wall from corner to corner. So my wallpaper is 21 inches long, and there's 2 ways you can do it. The first is you can actually take a long level like the one I have here, and you can start at the ceiling and work your way down and draw a straight line for yourself to follow on your first row of wallpaper. I'm actually going to be using a laser level just because I'm going to leave it on while I work because I have one. If you don't have a laser level, this works perfectly fine, and these are really inexpensive, and any home or weekend warrior, any home DIYer should absolutely have one of these or more than one, because I actually have multiple ones upstairs and downstairs. So I'm going to make a mark on the wall because I have trim here that I'm working with. If you don't have trim, you can actually just set your wallpaper on the floor and run your laser level straight across the edge. But because I'm working with a piece of trim that's already installed, when I lay my level, it's not exactly even because of the trim on this bottom side, and I'll show you what I mean here. So normally you could just lay your wallpaper down. You don't have trim there, and it wouldn't account for this 1/4 inch or so gap on the left-hand side. but since I have the trim, I actually have to hold up my paper here on the wall. And I'm just gonna make a little mark with a pencil the edge of my wallpaper. Now when I turn my laser level on, I'll be able to line it up with this exact mark. And then I can see, if you can see, here's my mark and here's the edge of the wallpaper. So quite a bit of difference if I were to run the level just on the floor. So I gotta make sure I hit this mark here. I'm gonna turn my level on and show you what I mean. So here's my mark right here on the wall. That's the length of the wallpaper that I need. And you can actually use your level to double check that, just to make sure that you are in fact accurate. And mine should be 21 inches, which I'll also make another little mark here. So you can see it's right on top of one another. And you can see my level, my laser when I turn it on, and I'm just gonna scoot it over until it hits that line perfectly. And I'm gonna hold my wallpaper up to it just to make sure that my line is in fact accurate. And it looks perfect. Now that I have my laser projected on the wall, I know exactly where my edge is, so I don't go over, I don't put it on all wonky. And like I said, you only have to do this for the first row, and then you should be able to follow along, and it should be straight. And so I'm gonna cut a piece of wallpaper off of the roll so I don't have to manage the whole heavy roll. And then I'm gonna first paste the back. So not only am I gonna paste the wall, but I'm also gonna paste the back of the paper. And then you fold the insides up so they touch. And that way you have a little bit of paper to work with without a lot of weight, and the pasted side to the pasted side will keep your paste from drying and keep your everything so that it doesn't dry too fast when you try to install it on the wall. Because this is real paper wallpaper. So they sell lots of different kinds of wallpaper. They sell stuff with vinyl in it and things that make wallpaper just a little bit stronger, but this is only 30 cents a square foot. So it is your basic paper, and it's very delicate. So I wanna make sure that I don't have to do a lot of wiggling when I get it up there so that I don't get any tears or rips or anything like that. So I'm gonna paste this, and as you can see, it's laying out like this. You can see my edge there, my tape for the length, and then I'm gonna paste it with the same paintbrush that I'm gonna use for edging the walls around the ceiling and the corner with the wallpaper paste adhesive on the actual wall itself. So this is my trusty paint tray with my adhesive in it. And I'm just gonna be using this 3-inch paintbrush to apply the paste directly to the back of the wallpaper, paying close attention to the corners and the edges. Now that I have all my edges and the corners and all this, the back of this wallpaper pasted, I'm just gonna fold it up, and I'll show you how. Paste to paste. Like this. And that'll keep the paste nice and moist while I work on getting the paste on the wall as well. I am now ready to paint on my adhesive, and I'm going to be using the roller brush I showed you earlier, but also the paintbrush. And the paintbrush is going to be for in the corner, and then the top and bottom around the baseboard and the ceiling. That way I don't get any wallpaper paste on the ceiling trying to use the roller brush, just like painting. Now that both my wallpaper and my wall has been pasted, I shouldn't have any trouble sliding the paper into place right against my laser line. Now you're going to want to go back through and smooth out any bubbles. And if you have a tiny little bubble, you can cut it with a knife right now, remove the air and kind of smooth it down. If you have larger bubbles, you may have to take off your paper and start over. Anything larger than 1/4 is really hard to move with a cut method, but if you just have little ones, you can actually correct it with your knife right now. So now that you've got your first row hung as straight as you possibly can against that right edge, it's time to take your knife and cut along the excess at the top, bottom, or side. Take a very extremely sharp knife with a brand new blade and just cut right along that edge very carefully as to not fray your paper. When I went over the supplies list for you, I did not go over this, and I went over a scraper instead, and I ended up using this instead just because this paper is actual paper and it doesn't have any vinyl in it, which means it's very fragile and can rip and crease easily. So this is a much better tool, and I'll post the link to this one below as well to help you get all the bubbles and the creases out and stuff like that. It's just a little bit more delicate on your paper than the scraper is. And then now that I'm satisfied that all of my bubbles and everything are out, now I just need to go over it with, you can either use a wet sponge or I'm just going to use an old rag just to make sure I get all of the edges clean, and so we don't have any paper paste or residue on the outside of the paper. This is also a really good time to check all your edges and make sure they're adhered properly, and if they aren't, you can go back in with your little paintbrush and just hit the edges and smooth it right back down. Now that I'm ready to apply my second row of wallpaper, it's time to consider the repeat. Now the repeat is where your paper has a certain amount of pattern, and then the pattern starts over. So my repeat for my next row is going to be about 10 inches down. It's different for every wallpaper, so the way you figure out the repeat is you just hold up your next row to the ceiling where you're going to start your second one, and then you see where the pattern matches up, and then you cut off that much. So mine is 10 inches, so I'm going to be conscious of that when I put it down on the floor to measure the length. I'm going to cut the first 10 inches off, and then I'm going to measure my 112 inches from there. I am done with the second row, as you can see behind me, and here's what it looks like. And a couple of things I wanted to say before I continue on. Number one is don't expect perfection, especially if you are not a professional and you have never done this before. I made the mistake when I first started getting really frustrated about not having the line perfect, not having this perfect, and blah blah. And I drove myself crazy with frustration out of it. So when I finally got through it and it was really smooth, it was when I gave up the idea of perfection at all. So I just want to say that. So if your line, if you're on your first row, if your line isn't going perfectly straight, don't worry about it. As long as you're, you know, 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch within your line, especially when you're doing a brick pattern like this that has lots of texture and lots of interest, then it's really not going to be a big deal. It's going to be totally fine. So don't worry about that. Number one. Number two is the most important thing when you do the second row, of course, is making sure your seam is as invisible as possible. You butt up your line like this, so the seams are right next to each other. They do not overlap, so you just want to make sure that you don't get any overlap. And once you get it as close to the edge as possible, you have the whole row of wallpaper on the wall, then you can kind of scoot it over into the line if there are areas where it's not quite perfect, and then that will give you a nearly invisible seam. The third thing is normally you would cut off your excess before it dries onto your nearby wall. So in my case, I'm just doing one wall, so I do have a little bit of overlap on the sides, a little bit of overlap on the ceiling, and then also the floor as well. And this cannot be cut wet, at least not with this wallpaper. If you have something a little sturdier with vinyl or something like that in it, then you can probably go ahead and cut it with your straight edge and a really sharp knife. But even with a straight edge and a really sharp knife, I mean brand new blade, my paper will just fray if it's wet. So right now I'm leaving, as you can see, I'm leaving the edges alone. The ceiling has a little bit of an edge. I tried to cut it, but it's just making my wallpaper fray, and I do not want a frayed edge, so I'm just gonna leave it alone until it's dry, and then I'm gonna cut that edge. At that point, if I need to add a little bit more paste underneath the edges to make sure they're nice and smooth, I'm happy to do that. It's better to do that than it is to have a frayed edge, so I'm just gonna leave it alone for now to dry. So I'm gonna continue working, and then I will give you a little update in just a little while. I am now several hours into my project, and I have gotten 4 rows done, which is just it's probably about exactly half of this wall that I'm going to be doing. And I really like the way it looks, but I really, really hate applying this wallpaper. And it's just a real pain in the neck. I'm having all kinds of problems with it. It wants to rip, it doesn't want to line up right. and it's become more and more apparent to me as I go on. The straighter your first line is, the straighter you can get your wallpaper onto that line, probably the easier it will go. Every subsequent piece gets a little bit harder to line up correctly because probably that first piece, I know that first piece wasn't exactly right. It was as close as I could get it. It was probably 1/8 of an inch from the line all the way down from the top to ceiling, but it's really made an extreme difference as I go through in difficulty of applying it in a straight line. So keep that in mind if you do it for yourself, that the better you can get that line, probably the easier your project will go from start to finish. And also, I don't have a helper, and if you had a helper, I think that would even go a little bit faster because my paste is drying on my paper and on my wall almost as fast as I can apply it. I have no air conditioning going in here, I have no fan going in here, but the paste is drying so fast that I can barely get the paper on before I'm reapplying paste. The other thing I don't love about this wallpaper is that now I'm having to touch up the edges as I go with paste on the inside, and it rubs off of the print a little bit on the front. So I have to be really careful not to get too much paste on the front of the paper because it does ruin the look of it. So a huge challenge, but I just wanted to give you an update, and here's what it looks like. As long as you aren't standing this close to it, it looks pretty good. So I will keep you updated on the progress as I go along, but it's several hours and about halfway done now. It is now the end of the day, and I'm getting ready to do the very last row of wallpaper. And if you can, as you can see behind me, or if you can tell, it's not enough for a full length of strip. So the way I'm going to mitigate that is I'm actually going to, it's 10 inches, that's the width of the strip that I need to go in that spot, and I'm going to cut the wallpaper down at about 12 inches, which will give me about 2 inches play on the right hand side, and then I'm just going to wrap it around the corner. And even though I'm not going to continue the wallpaper, I'm just going to do the one wall. I just want to give myself extra so that I don't have any problems. I wouldn't want to cut it too short. And then once the wallpaper is dry, then I will go back into the corner and I will remove the excess wallpaper and probably have to do a little bit of patching with the wallpaper paste, like I've done all along. What I've noticed, and one thing I wanted to mention too before I forget, is that it's really hard to get your edges with paste all over them when you're doing it on the floor. I've tried everything. I've gone over my own hand with the brush, I've let it fly on the floor, but the best way to do it really I've found, and this I know for sure is not appropriate or proper wallpaper technique, but I've let the rules fly out the window, all the rules that I've heard about doing this project, because I'm just doing what works. And what's worked for me is to, once I get the wallpaper on the wall, I've kind of peeled back the edges just a little bit and went in with a little bit of extra paste right along the edges. And then I take a wet rag that's got water in it, and I rinse this every single time I use it on the edge. But then I just wipe the wet rag with water down along the edge and remove any excess paste. And the reason you want to remove the excess is because it will damage your print of your wallpaper if you don't. So I learned that the hard way somewhere in the beginning. There's a couple spots along the edge that are a little bit whiter than what the pattern is, and that's because I just accidentally left the paste there, or I didn't hit it properly with a rag or whatever. So just so you know, that's really how I'm working my edges. I know it's not the proper wallpaper technique. I've learned after doing this today that there is an art to this. I think there's an art to this. And I certainly am no artist. So anyway, that's just one more tip on how I found to mitigate some of those edges lifting. We don't want the edges to lift at all. So that's how I'm mitigating that issue. So I am going to cut my wallpaper and do the last strip, and then I'll be so excited to share the big reveal with you. My wallpaper is done, and the full panorama of the room is coming up next, but I just wanted to share a couple more tips with you before I wrap up the video. The first thing is, I know the last time I was shooting while I was doing the wallpaper, I was very frustrated. I was about 4 rows in, and I was frustrated with the process because I was having all kinds of trouble getting everything to line up. But I wanted to say the last 3 or 4 rows I did were really easy and went up in about 5 minutes. So don't let the first few rows discourage you if you're having a lot of trouble. It should get easier. I don't know if it was my technique getting better or if it just, I don't know, started to cooperate out of thin air. Maybe a little bit of both, but just hang in there. It should get easier as you go. The second thing, and I probably mentioned it already when I was going through the video, was line up a helper. If there's one thing that you can do, it's to line somebody up to help you paste and place it on the wall, line up your seams, unfold something that gets folded at the bottom, etc., etc. A helper would have made this probably go twice as fast or made it a lot easier. I was having trouble with my paste drying too quickly and whatnot, and I think it's because I was trying to do it alone. So line up a helper. Also, throughout the video, I kind of gave you a lot of tips as I was going, things that were coming to me and I was thinking of. So make sure that you, if you do want to attempt this project, that you go back through those tips carefully and kind of listen to them, because I think if I would have had some of those, someone giving me those tips at the beginning, I think I would have had a lot easier time doing this project. So go ahead back and listen to all the tips. Thank you so much for watching. I'm really excited to share it with you. I love the way it turned out. I think it's great. It adds a lot of texture and dimension to an otherwise big white box. So I really am thrilled, even though the first part was kind of difficult for me. All of the links below are in the description box, and that's everything I used, from the wallpaper to the paste to everything that you saw in the video. So if you're interested in what I used and what it was, it'll be there for you in the description box. And if this content was helpful to you and you loved it, I would really appreciate if you like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you don't miss any of my new content, which is generally released on Fridays. Also, if you head over to my website at DecorSauce.com and enter your email, I have a free giveaway, so make sure you check that out as well. I really appreciate you, and I appreciate you watching. Thank you very much, and have a happy DIY.